The envelope was cream-colored, expensive cardstock with my name written in my mother's precise calligraphy. Claire Whitman. Not Claire and guest. Just Claire. Alone. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the sharp corners pressing into my palm. Inside was my brother Derek's wedding invitation, gold foil lettering announcing his marriage to Bethany Caldwell at the Riverside Estate in 3 months. But it was the handwritten note tucked behind the invitation that made my hands go numb. The note was on my mother's personal stationery, the kind she used for thank you cards and correspondence with her garden club friends. The words were brief, clinical, devastating in their simplicity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Claire, your father and I have discussed this at length. Given the circumstances, we feel the most generous gift you could give Derek and Bethany would be to politely decline this invitation. Your presence would create unnecessary tension during what should be a joyful celebration. We trust you'll understand and make the right choice for everyone involved. The family will be much more comfortable without the disruption your attendance might cause. Mother. I read it 3 times, each word landing like a stone in still water. They didn't want me at my own brother's wedding. They were asking me to disappear. No, not asking. Telling. Framing it as a gift, as if my absence was some noble sacrifice I should be grateful to offer. I sat on my apartment floor with that note in my hand and felt something inside me crack open. Not break, exactly. More like a door I'd been holding shut finally swinging wide. They wanted me gone. They'd finally said out loud what I'd felt my entire life, that invisible current of disappointment that followed me through every family dinner, every holiday, every milestone where I somehow fell short of whatever unspoken standard the Whitman family maintained. Fine. I would disappear. But not the way they expected. This is the story of how my family asked me to vanish from their lives, and how I gave them exactly what they wanted, only to reappear in a way that would shatter everything they thought they knew about me. And by the time my brother's wedding day arrived, they would wish they'd never written that note. My name is Claire Whitman. I'm 31 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life being invisible to the people who were supposed to see me most clearly. But here's what they didn't know. While they were busy pretending I didn't exist, I was building something extraordinary. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't be me who felt ashamed. Growing up in the Whitman household meant understanding your place in an invisible hierarchy that no one acknowledged but everyone felt. My father, Martin Whitman, was a partner at a mid-sized accounting firm in Portland, the kind of steady, respectable position that paid well enough to afford a nice house in the suburbs and annual family vacations to predictable destinations. My mother, Patricia, devoted herself to volunteer work, garden parties, and maintaining the family's social standing with the fierce attention other people gave to their careers. Derek was born when I was 4, and from the moment he entered the world, the balance shifted in ways I was too young to understand but old enough to feel. He was easy where I was difficult. Compliant where I asked questions. He slept through the night, ate his vegetables without complaint, excelled at sports, brought home report cards that made my parents glow with pride. I was the prototype, the first attempt that revealed all the flaws. He was the perfected model. By the time I was a teenager, the pattern was set. Derek played varsity baseball and dated the homecoming queen. I spent Friday nights in the library and came home with obscure books about urban planning and architecture. Derek went to Oregon State on a partial athletic scholarship and pledged the right fraternity. I went to Portland State and worked 3 part-time jobs to cover what my parents said they couldn't afford after helping Derek with his expenses. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was building independence, learning resilience, becoming someone who didn't need validation from people who would never offer it anyway. And maybe that was true. But it still hurt every time my mother forgot to mention my graduation when talking to her friends. It still stung when family photos at holidays were arranged with Derek in the center, my parents on either side, and me hovering at the edge of the frame like an afterthought someone felt obligated to include. The real fracture came when I was 25. I'd been working for an architecture firm in downtown Portland, mostly doing grunt work, drafting blueprints for other people's visions, making coffee, organizing files. But at night, I was designing. I'd fill notebooks with sketches of buildings that didn't exist yet, neighborhoods reimagined, public spaces that could transform communities. I submitted a design to a national competition for affordable housing solutions, something I worked on for 6 months in the spare bedroom of my cramped apartment. I won. Not an honorable mention or a runner-up certificate. First place. The prize was $50,000 and a feature in Architectural Digest. My design proposed modular housing units that could be assembled quickly, sustainably, and beautifully, with shared green spaces and community gardens integrated into the structure. The judges called it visionary, a blueprint for the future of urban development. I called my parents to tell them. My mother answered on the third ring, and I could hear the clink of wine glasses in the background, one of her dinner parties in full swing. I won, I said, my voice shaking with excitement and disbelief. The housing competition. The national one I told you about. I won first place. There was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough to let you know you've interrupted something important. That's nice, dear, my mother said. Her voice had that distant quality it always got when she was distracted. Listen, we have guests over right now. Can we talk about this later? But Mom, this is huge. It's in Architectural Digest. It's $50,000. It could change my whole career. I'm sure it's lovely, Claire. We'll celebrate when things calm down. She lowered her voice slightly. Your father and I are hosting the Hendersons tonight. You know how important that is for his firm connections. She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, staring at the acceptance letter on my counter, and felt the full weight of my insignificance in their world. A national award, a feature in a major publication, prize money that would let me finally stop working 3 jobs, and it rated below a dinner party with my father's colleagues. Derek called me the next morning. I heard, he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. That's incredible, Claire. You always were the creative one. I'm really proud of you. His kindness almost made it worse. Derek had never been cruel to me, never deliberately excluding or dismissive. He was just effortlessly excellent at being what our parents wanted, while I was constantly swimming upstream trying to justify my existence. His support felt sincere, but it also highlighted how little our parents cared about anything I accomplished. 2 weeks later, Derek got promoted to senior sales associate at the pharmaceutical company where he worked. My parents threw him a celebration dinner at an expensive steakhouse downtown, invited 20 people, gave toasts about his bright future and their pride in his achievements. I wasn't invited. I found out about it from Derek's Facebook photos. That was 6 years ago. Since then, I'd learned to stop expecting anything from Martin and Patricia Whitman. I called on holidays because it felt like the right thing to do, attended obligatory family dinners where I sat quietly while they asked Derek about his career and his girlfriend and his plans. I sent birthday cards that went unacknowledged. I existed in their lives the way you exist in the background of someone else's photograph, visible only if someone looks closely enough to notice. The prize money from the competition changed everything, though they never knew it. I used it as seed capital, started my own small firm specializing in affordable housing design and urban renewal projects. I took on clients no one else wanted, neighborhoods dismissed as too poor or too complicated, communities that had been ignored by traditional architecture firms. I worked 18-hour days, learned construction management, studied zoning laws, built relationships with developers who cared more about impact than profit margins. Within 3 years, my firm had completed 4 major projects. Low-income housing in North Portland that won state recognition for design excellence. A community center in a struggling neighborhood that became a model for similar projects across the Pacific Northwest. A mixed-use development that transformed an abandoned industrial site into affordable live-work spaces for artists and small businesses. Each project was profitable, sustainable, and actually helped people. I named the firm Meridian Design Collaborative. Not my name, nothing that would connect it to the Whitmans. Just a clean, professional identity that let the work speak for itself. My team grew to 12 people, architects and designers who shared my vision of creating beautiful spaces that served communities rather than just showcasing wealth. We operated out of a renovated warehouse in southeast Portland, all exposed brick and natural light, exactly the kind of space I'd dreamed about when I was drafting blueprints in my apartment at 2 in the morning. My parents never asked about my work. When family conversations turned to careers, they'd focus on Derek's steady climb at the pharmaceutical company, his impressive sales numbers, his expanding territory. If anyone asked what I did, my mother would offer a vague smile and say I was in design, as if I made greeting cards or arranged flowers. My father would change the subject. I stopped correcting them. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth was, I didn't need their validation anymore. I had a career I loved, work that mattered, a team that respected me, and clients who trusted my vision. What did it matter if Martin and Patricia Whitman never understood what I'd built? Then Derek met Bethany Caldwell at a charity golf tournament 2 years ago. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep from a well-connected family, exactly the kind of woman my mother had probably been dreaming about since Derek was old enough to date. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Within 6 months they were engaged. Within a year, wedding planning consumed every family gathering. I watched from my usual position at the margins as my mother transformed into a wedding coordinator, discussing venues and caterers and flower arrangements with an intensity she'd never brought to anything involving me. Bethany was perfect, according to Patricia. Poised, accomplished, from good people. The wedding would be at the Riverside Estate, 300 guests, a 4-course dinner, a live band. No expense would be spared for Derek's special day. I was happy for my brother. Genuinely. Derek had always been kind to me in his passive way, never actively participating in my exclusion but never standing up against it either. He deserved happiness, and if Bethany made him happy, then I was glad. I assumed I'd attend the wedding, sit in the back, smile politely, leave early. My usual role. Then the invitation arrived with my mother's note. The best gift you could give would be to politely decline. Your presence would create unnecessary tension. The family would be much more comfortable without the disruption your attendance might cause. I read those words until they blurred. What disruption? What tension? I'd spent my entire life being as unobtrusive as possible, taking up the least space, requiring the least attention, being as invisible as I could manage while still technically existing. And now even that wasn't enough. Now my mere presence at a family wedding was considered disruptive. I called Derek that night. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful and relaxed. "Hey Claire, what's up?" "I got the invitation," I said. "And Mom's note." The silence that followed told me everything. He knew. He'd known they were going to ask me not to come. "Claire, listen. It's complicated. Bethany's family is really traditional, and Mom's been stressed about making everything perfect. She just thinks it would be easier if I wasn't there," I finished. "If your sister didn't exist for one day so everyone else could be comfortable." "It's not like that," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's just, you know how Mom gets about appearances. And Bethany's parents are kind of judgmental, and there's been some talk about family dynamics, and Mom doesn't want any drama that might what, Derek?" I interrupted. "I've never caused drama. I've never made scenes. I show up, I'm polite, I leave. What exactly am I going to do that's so terrible?" He sighed, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he did when he felt cornered. "I don't know, Claire. I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm just saying Mom asked me to support this decision, and it's my wedding, and I want everything to go smoothly." "So you want me to stay away too?" I said flatly. "I want everyone to be happy," he said, which wasn't an answer but was somehow worse than a direct yes. I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with something that felt like grief but sharper, more immediate. This was it, then. The final confirmation of what I'd always suspected. I wasn't just undervalued or overlooked. I was unwanted. My own family would rather pretend I didn't exist than make space for me at a wedding. I spent that night pacing my apartment, my mind racing through years of accumulated slights and dismissals, every forgotten birthday and ignored achievement, every family photo where I was cropped out or positioned at the edge. I thought about calling them, demanding an explanation, forcing them to articulate exactly what was so wrong with me that my presence at my brother's wedding constituted a disruption worth preventing. But then a different thought emerged, cold and clear and strangely liberating. They wanted me to disappear. Fine. I would disappear. Completely. Not just from the wedding, from everything. I would give them exactly what they asked for and let them live with the consequences. I opened my laptop and started composing an email. Not to my parents, not to Derek. To my attorney, the one who handled all my business contracts and corporate filings. I had work to do, plans to set in motion, a disappearance to execute that would be far more thorough than my mother had imagined when she wrote that note. If the Whitmans wanted Claire gone, then Claire would vanish. But what they didn't know, what they'd never bothered to learn, was that Claire Whitman wasn't the only identity I'd been building. And when the truth finally emerged, when they realized exactly who they'd dismissed and discarded, it wouldn't be me standing there embarrassed and excluded. It would be them, finally understanding the cost of their cruelty. 3 days after receiving that note, I stopped answering my parents' calls. Not dramatically, not with explanations or confrontations. I just stopped picking up. When my mother left voicemails asking if I'd made my decision about the wedding, I deleted them without listening to the whole message. When my father sent a brief text saying they hoped I'd be mature about this situation, I archived it and moved on with my day. Derek tried calling twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. His messages were apologetic but vague, saying he hoped I understood, that he didn't want hard feelings, that maybe after the wedding we could all sit down and talk. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be wasted breath. The silence from my end created exactly the outcome they'd wanted. I disappeared. From their perspective, I'd done the right thing, made the mature choice, stepped aside gracefully. I could imagine my mother telling her friends that I was busy with work, couldn't make it to the wedding, sent my regrets. Derek probably felt relieved that there wouldn't be any awkward confrontation or emotional scene. They got what they asked for without having to face any of the ugliness of actually asking for it directly. What they didn't know was that my silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. I spent the next 2 months executing a plan I'd been building in my head since the night I hung up on Derek. The first step was reaching out to contacts I'd made through my firm, people who understood what Meridian Design Collaborative had accomplished and what we were capable of achieving. One of those contacts was Victoria Lynn, the director of the Portland Housing Authority, who'd been trying to recruit me for a major public-private partnership for months. The project was massive, a complete redevelopment of the waterfront district that had been stalled for years due to political gridlock and community opposition. The Housing Authority wanted someone who could design affordable housing that wouldn't feel like affordable housing, mixed-income developments that actually mixed rather than segregating poor residents into separate buildings, public spaces that would serve the entire community rather than just being decorative elements for wealthy buyers. Victoria had approached me 6 months earlier, but I'd hesitated. The project was high-profile, politically sensitive, and would require me to step fully into the public eye. My firm would no longer be a quiet success story known only within urban planning circles. We'd be on the news, in the papers, subject to public scrutiny and criticism. I'd built my career on doing good work away from the spotlight, and part of me wanted to keep it that way. But sitting in my apartment with my mother's note in my hand, something shifted. Why was I hiding? Why was I protecting my family's ignorance by keeping my success quiet? They'd made it clear I wasn't part of their family anymore. I didn't owe them privacy or discretion or the comfortable fiction that their disappointing daughter was just muddling through life in some forgettable design job. I called Victoria the next morning and told her I was in. She was thrilled, immediately scheduling meetings with city council members, community organizations, and the development consortium funding the project. Within a week, I was presenting preliminary designs to a room full of politicians, activists, and business leaders. Within 2 weeks, the City Council voted unanimously to move forward with Meridian Design Collaborative as the lead architecture firm. The press release went out on a Friday afternoon. Portland firm selected for landmark waterfront redevelopment. Claire Whitman's Meridian Design Collaborative to lead $50 million affordable housing project. My photo was in the Portland Tribune, the Oregonian, even picked up by some regional news outlets. The article detailed my previous projects, the awards the firm had won, my innovative approach to combining sustainability with affordability. I didn't tell my family. I didn't send them the articles or forward the press releases. I simply let the news exist in the world, knowing that eventually, inevitably, someone they knew would see it and mention it. Someone at my father's firm or my mother's garden club or Derek's office would read about Portland's exciting new waterfront development and the young architect leading the charge. But I didn't wait around to see their reaction. The second phase of my disappearance required me to actually disappear, at least from Portland. The waterfront project included a research component, studying successful mixed-income developments in other cities to identify best practices we could adapt. I volunteered to lead that research personally, which meant traveling for the next 6 weeks to Seattle, Vancouver, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. I left Portland 2 weeks before Derek's wedding without telling anyone where I was going. My team knew, of course, and Victoria knew, but that was it. I forwarded my apartment mail to my assistant, set my personal phone to Do Not Disturb, and focused entirely on work that would keep me far away from Oregon when my brother got married. The Seattle research began on a Tuesday morning in late August, exactly 10 days before Derek's wedding. I stood in front of a mixed-use development in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, watching residents stream out for their morning commutes. Young professionals in business casual, artists carrying portfolio cases, families with strollers, elderly residents with shopping bags. All living in the same building, sharing the same spaces, proving that income diversity could work when the design was thoughtful and the community engagement was genuine. My research assistant, Tyler Brennan, stood beside me with his tablet, taking notes on traffic patterns and street-level activation. Tyler was 26, brilliant, and completely uninterested in anything that wasn't directly related to urban design. He didn't know about my family situation and I preferred it that way. This trip was about work, about learning, about building something that mattered. We spent 3 days in Seattle, interviewing residents and property managers, photographing sight lines and common areas, measuring the distance between income-restricted units and market-rate units to see if the developers had actually integrated them or just clustered them separately. I filled 2 notebooks with observations and sketches, ideas for how we could adapt these principles to Portland's waterfront. Vancouver was next, then San Francisco. Each city offered different lessons, different approaches to the same fundamental challenge of creating housing that served everyone rather than just the wealthy. I worked from dawn until late evening, reviewing case studies in hotel rooms, video conferencing with my Portland team, refining our waterfront designs based on what I was learning. I thought about the wedding occasionally, brief flashes of awareness that somewhere back in Oregon my family was finalizing seating charts and confirming catering orders and preparing for a celebration I'd been explicitly uninvited from. But the thoughts came and went quickly, replaced by more immediate concerns about building codes and community feedback sessions and construction timelines. My phone stayed on Do Not Disturb, but I checked it once a day for work emergencies. On the Thursday before the wedding, I noticed 17 missed calls from my mother and 9 from Derek. No voicemails, just the calls themselves, which told me they wanted something but weren't desperate enough to actually leave a message explaining what. I didn't call back. Whatever they wanted, it could wait. I had a meeting with a housing cooperative in San Francisco's Mission District that couldn't. The wedding was on Saturday. I spent that Saturday in a conference room at the San Francisco Housing Authority, presenting preliminary findings from my research tour to a group of planners who were considering a similar project for their own waterfront. The presentation went well. People asked smart questions, took my card, talked about potential collaboration. By the time I left the building, it was 6 p.m. West Coast time, which meant 9 in Portland. Derek's wedding would be in full swing. The ceremony had been scheduled for 5, which meant by now they'd finished photos and were probably sitting down for dinner. The Riverside Estate with its manicured gardens and string lights and carefully curated elegance. 300 guests eating overpriced chicken and drinking premium bar selections. My parents holding court, proud and satisfied that everything had gone according to plan. And I was 1,000 miles away, thinking about inclusionary zoning policies and construction timelines. Exactly where I'd chosen to be. I flew to Los Angeles on Sunday morning for the final leg of my research tour. My phone showed 32 missed calls when I turned it on airplane mode after takeoff. Still no voicemails. Whatever was happening back in Portland, they weren't panicked enough to articulate it in a message I could screen. Los Angeles offered different challenges than the Pacific Northwest cities. Water scarcity, earthquake codes, a more sprawling development pattern. But there were still lessons in how certain neighborhoods had managed to maintain economic diversity through intentional planning and community land trusts. I spent 4 days there, meeting with developers and activists and city officials, gathering the final pieces of research I needed. On my last evening in Los Angeles, sitting in my hotel room overlooking the city lights, I finally listened to my voicemails. There were 7, all from my mother, her voice progressing from annoyed to confused to something approaching concerned. The first one, left the Wednesday before the wedding, was curt. "Claire, we've been trying to reach you. Please call us back. There are some details we need to discuss before Saturday." The second, Thursday evening. "Claire, this is getting ridiculous. Your father and I need to speak with you. Call us immediately." The third, Friday afternoon, had a different quality. Her voice was tighter, less certain. "Claire, Derek mentioned that he hasn't been able to reach you either. We're starting to worry. If you're planning something disruptive, I need you to reconsider. This is your brother's wedding." The fourth was from Saturday morning, hours before the ceremony. "Claire, if you're receiving these messages, please just confirm that you're all right. We assumed you decided not to attend, which was the mature choice, but now no one has heard from you in weeks. Just let us know you're safe." The remaining 3 voicemails came after the wedding, and the shift in my mother's tone was dramatic. The annoyance was gone, replaced by something I'd never heard from her before. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. "Claire, Bethany's parents asked about you at the rehearsal dinner. They'd seen an article about the waterfront project and wanted to know if you were related. We didn't know what to tell them. Why didn't you mention this? Call us." The next one, Sunday morning. "Claire, your father and I have been discussing the situation. We may have been hasty in our previous communication. There are clearly things we need to talk about. Please call when you get this." The final voicemail, left Sunday evening. "Claire, whatever's happened between us, you're still our daughter. People have been asking questions we don't have answers to. The Caldwells seem to know more about your career than we do. This is embarrassing for the family. We need to address this together." I listened to all 7 messages twice, letting the progression wash over me. The arc from dismissive to demanding to worried to embarrassed. They'd assumed I would fade quietly into the background like I always had, that asking me not to attend the wedding was just formalizing an arrangement I'd already accepted. But then I'd actually disappeared, completely and thoroughly, and simultaneously my professional profile had exploded into public view. Now they were confused. Now they were embarrassed. Now they wanted to talk. I deleted all 7 voicemails and put my phone back on the nightstand. They'd had 31 years to want to talk to me. They could wait a little longer. I returned to Portland on a Wednesday afternoon in late September. The city felt different when I walked out of the airport terminal, or maybe I felt different in it. I'd been gone 6 weeks, long enough for the leaves to start changing color, long enough for the light to shift into that soft autumn gold that made Portland's downtown buildings glow. Tyler met me at baggage claim, bouncing with excitement. "You need to see what's been happening," he said, helping me load my suitcase into his car. "The press coverage of the waterfront project has been incredible. Victoria said she's been fielding interview requests daily. Everyone wants to talk about the affordable housing component and how we're involving the community in the design process." He chattered all the way back to the Meridian office, filling me in on developments I'd missed while traveling. The city council had approved an expanded budget. 2 additional community organizations had signed on as partners. A documentary filmmaker wanted to follow the project from design through construction. The office itself had transformed during my absence. My team had covered one entire wall with research photos and sketches from my tour. Seattle, Vancouver, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Dozens of images showing successful implementations of the principles we were trying to apply. Below the photos, they'd pinned newspaper articles about the waterfront project, including several that featured my name and photo prominently. "Welcome back," Victoria said, appearing in the doorway with a huge smile. She looked professional as always in a navy blazer and practical flats, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. "We've missed you. Also, your phone has been ringing constantly." I took messages. She handed me a stack of pink message slips. My mother, my father, Derek, all multiple times. But also messages from journalists, from other architects wanting to collaborate, from city council members with questions about the project timeline. My professional calls outnumbered my family calls 3-1. "Anything urgent?" I asked, flipping through them. Victoria hesitated. "Your mother called the office directly yesterday when she couldn't reach you on your cell. She seemed upset that we wouldn't give her your travel schedule." "What did you tell her?" "That you were on a research tour and would be back in the office this week. She asked if you were avoiding her." I told her I wasn't privy to your personal arrangements. I smiled despite myself. "Thank you for running interference." Victoria's expression turned more serious. "Claire, I don't know what's going on with your family, and you don't have to tell me. But I've been in this business long enough to recognize when someone is dealing with personal complications. If you need support, professional or otherwise, we've got your back." I felt unexpected emotion rise in my throat. My team, this group of people I'd assembled to design buildings and transform neighborhoods, had become more of a family to me than the Whitmans had ever been. They saw my work, valued my contributions, trusted my vision. They didn't need me to be anyone other than who I actually was. "I appreciate that," I managed. "And you're right, there are complications. But nothing that affects the project. I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I should be doing." Victoria nodded and left me to sort through the messages. I separated them into 2 piles. Professional contacts on the left, family on the right. The professional pile was 3 times larger and infinitely more interesting. Interview requests from Portland Monthly and Dwell magazine. A speaking invitation from the AIA conference in Chicago. Collaboration inquiries from firms in Seattle and Denver. The family pile was just 3 names repeated over and over. Martin Whitman. Patricia Whitman. Derek Whitman. All wanting the same thing, wanting me to call them back, to explain myself, to make sense of a situation that had apparently embarrassed them in front of people whose opinions they valued. I took the family pile and fed it through the office shredder, watching the pink slips turn into thin ribbons of paper. Then I turned my attention to the professional messages, starting with the interview requests. If my family wanted to know what I'd been doing while they were busy uninviting me from weddings, they could read about it in the papers like everyone else. The Portland Monthly interview was scheduled for Friday afternoon at a cafe in the Pearl District. The reporter, a woman named Diane Kerrigan, met me with a digital recorder and a notepad filled with preliminary questions. She was in her 40s, professionally dressed, with the focused energy of someone who took her work seriously. "Thank you for making time," she said as we settled into a corner booth. "The waterfront project is generating a lot of buzz, and our readers are curious about the architect behind it. You've managed to stay relatively under the radar until now." "That was intentional," I said. "I prefer to let the work speak for itself." "Well, the work is certainly speaking." She opened her notepad. "But I have to admit, what interested me most about your story isn't just the buildings. It's the trajectory. You started your firm only 6 years ago, fresh off a national award. Most architects your age are still working for someone else, grinding through the ranks. How did you go from competition winner to running your own successful firm so quickly?" "I took a risk," I said simply. "I used the prize money as capital, took on projects other firms wouldn't touch, focused on impact over prestige. Affordable housing isn't glamorous, but it's necessary. I found clients who valued that necessity." "Your parents must be proud," Diane said, and something in her tone suggested this wasn't a casual observation. I understand your father works in finance? Accounting, I corrected. And to be honest, my family and I don't discuss my work much. We've had different priorities. That's interesting, given that your brother just got married and several of the wedding guests have mentioned being surprised to learn about your career. Apparently it came up in conversation. I felt a cold awareness settle over me. This wasn't just a puff piece about the waterfront project. Diane had done research, talked to people, found the human interest angle that would make her article more compelling than a straightforward architecture profile. I wasn't at my brother's wedding, I said carefully. Family dynamics are complicated. I prefer to keep the focus on the work. Of course, Diane said, but she was writing notes quickly. Though it does raise questions about how someone builds a portfolio worth millions while their own family seems unaware of their success. That disconnect is interesting from a human perspective. Is it? I kept my voice level. Or is it just sad that we live in a culture where family members don't bother learning about each other's lives unless there's social capital to be gained from the association? Diane looked up from her notepad, her expression shifting from reporter to something more human. That's quite a statement. It's quite a situation, I replied. My family asked me not to attend my brother's wedding because they felt my presence would be disruptive. I honored that request. Now they're apparently embarrassed that people at the wedding knew more about my professional accomplishments than they did. The irony isn't lost on me. Can I quote you on that? I thought about it. My mother would be horrified to see family business discussed in a magazine article. My father would be furious at the public airing of private matters. Derek would probably feel caught in the middle, uncomfortable with the exposure but unable to deny the basic facts. Yes, I said finally. You can quote me. I'm done protecting people who never protected me. The article came out 2 weeks later. Portland Monthly gave it the cover, a striking photo of me standing in front of one of my completed housing projects, arms crossed, looking directly at the camera. The headline read "Building Bridges While Burning Others, Claire Whitman's Unconventional Path to Architectural Success." Diane had written a balanced piece, discussing both my professional achievements and the family rift that had become public knowledge. She'd interviewed Victoria, several of my team members, and residents of my completed projects. But she'd also included my quote about being asked not to attend the wedding, about families only valuing success when it reflected well on them. The article went viral locally. Within days, everyone in Portland's professional circles was talking about it. Some people expressed sympathy, sharing their own stories of family rejection and estrangement. Others were more critical, suggesting I was airing dirty laundry for publicity. But everyone was talking, which meant everyone now knew exactly what the Whitmans had done and how spectacularly they'd miscalculated in dismissing me. My phone exploded with calls. More interview requests, speaking invitations, professional opportunities. But also, inevitably, my family. Derek called first, on a Tuesday morning 3 days after the article published. I was in a design review meeting when my phone buzzed with his name. I let it go to voicemail. He called again that afternoon. Again that evening. Finally, on the third attempt, I stepped out of the office and answered. "Claire, thank God." His voice was strained. "We need to talk." "Do we?" "That article. Jesus, Claire, you made us sound like terrible people." "Did I?" I leaned against the brick exterior of my building, watching cars pass on the street below. "Or did I just tell the truth about what happened?" "You told part of the truth. You made it sound like we just randomly decided to exclude you when there were legitimate reasons for what, Derek? For asking your sister not to come to your wedding? I'm curious about these legitimate reasons." He was quiet for a moment. Bethany's family is very traditional. They have certain expectations about family dynamics and appearances. Mom was trying to avoid complicated questions about why you and I aren't close, why our family doesn't really function as a unit. So the solution was to pretend I don't exist? The solution was to make things easier for everyone, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. But instead you disappeared and then reappeared as this successful architect that nobody knew about, and now Bethany's parents think we're some dysfunctional family that doesn't even know what our own relatives are doing. You are some dysfunctional family that doesn't know what your own relatives are doing, I pointed out. That's not a misperception. That's just reality. Claire, come on. I know we haven't been the closest, and maybe Mom and Dad could have been more supportive over the years, but that article made us look like villains. Bethany's been dealing with awkward questions from her family. Mom's friends are gossiping. Dad's colleagues have been making comments. This is affecting all of us. Good, I said simply. Maybe you should have thought about that before you supported their decision to uninvite me. I was trying to keep the peace, Derek protested. It was my wedding. I didn't want conflict or drama or a sister, I finished. You didn't want a sister at your wedding, Derek. Just say it honestly. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he said quietly, that's not fair. Isn't it? I pushed off from the wall, started walking back toward the office entrance. You made a choice. I made a different one. Now we're both living with the consequences. I don't see what there is to discuss. Mom wants to see you, he said. She's really upset about all of this. Then she can call me herself and use her words like an adult. She has called you. Dozens of times. And when I'm ready to talk to her, I will. But that's my decision to make, not yours to broker. I pulled open the office door. I have to go, Derek. Good luck dealing with your in-laws. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline mixing with anger and something that might have been sadness. Derek wasn't a villain. He'd never been cruel or deliberately hurtful. But he'd gone along with our parents' request without really questioning it, prioritized his own comfort over basic family loyalty. That was its own kind of cruelty, the passive kind that allowed bad behavior to continue unchallenged. My mother finally reached me the following week. I was working late at the office, reviewing construction bids for the waterfront project, when my phone rang with her number. Something made me answer. Maybe exhaustion, maybe curiosity about what she'd actually say when forced to speak directly instead of leaving voicemails. Claire, she said, and her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Small, uncertain, stripped of its usual polished confidence. Thank you for answering. I didn't say anything, just waited. That article, she continued. It was very painful to read. The way you portrayed our family, the things you said about the wedding. People have been calling with questions, expressing concern. It's been humiliating. Has it? I said flatly. I think you owe us an explanation, she went on, some of her usual authority creeping back. We may have made mistakes, but going to the press with family business is unacceptable. It's vindictive and childish and, I didn't go to the press, I interrupted. A reporter interviewed me about the waterfront project. She asked about my family. I told her the truth. That's not vindictive. That's just honest. You made us sound like monsters who rejected you for no reason. You did reject me for no reason, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my intention to stay calm. You literally asked me not to come to Derek's wedding because my presence would be disruptive. Those were your words, Mom. Your handwritten note. I didn't make that up. There were circumstances you don't understand, she said. Complicated social dynamics with Bethany's family that required careful management. So manage them by excluding your daughter. Perfect solution. We thought you'd understand, she said, her voice tight. We thought you'd be mature enough to see the bigger picture. I do see the bigger picture, I replied. I see a family that values appearances over relationships. I see parents who never bothered learning what their daughter does for a living. I see a pattern of dismissal and neglect that's been going on my entire life, and a wedding invitation that finally made it explicit. That's not fair, Claire. We've always supported you. I laughed, a sharp sound that surprised both of us. When? When exactly did you support me? When I won a National Architecture Award and you couldn't be bothered to celebrate because you were hosting a dinner party? When I started my own firm and you told your friends I was in design like it was something embarrassing? When was this support happening? Because I must have missed it. We didn't realize, she started, then stopped. Her breathing was audible over the phone line. We didn't know about your firm. About what you'd built. You never told us. I tried to tell you, I said quietly. Multiple times over the years. You weren't interested. You'd change the subject or make excuses or just forget we'd had the conversation. So eventually I stopped trying. Why would I keep offering information you clearly didn't want? If we'd known you were this successful, obviously we would have what? Been proud? Included me? Treated me like I mattered? I walked to my office window, looking out at the Portland skyline lit up against the evening darkness. That's the problem, Mom. Your interest in me is directly proportional to how much social capital you can extract from my achievements. That's not love. That's just exploitation with better branding. She was crying now, I could hear it. Soft, almost silent sobs that she was trying to control. That's a terrible thing to say to your mother. Is it? Or is it terrible that it's true? What do you want from us, Claire? What would possibly make this right? I thought about that question. What did I want? An apology would be meaningless coming from people who didn't understand what they were apologizing for. Inclusion would feel hollow now, motivated by embarrassment rather than genuine desire for relationship. Money meant nothing, I had my own. Recognition came too late and for all the wrong reasons. I want you to understand what you did, I said finally. Not just apologize because you're embarrassed, but actually comprehend why asking me not to come to Derek's wedding was the culmination of 3 decades of making me feel like I didn't belong in my own family. I want you to sit with that discomfort instead of trying to manage it away. We can do that, my mother said quickly. We can have a conversation, a real one. Your father and I want to make this right. Do you? Or do you want to fix your reputation? Because those are very different things, Mom. Both, she admitted, her voice raw. I won't lie to you, Claire. Yes, the social fallout has been difficult. But reading that article, seeing how you described feeling invisible and unwanted, that hurt in a different way. I never thought of it like that. I never realized we'd made you feel that way. How could you not realize? I turned away from the window, my reflection ghostly in the dark glass. Every family dinner where you asked Derek about his life and forgot to ask about mine. Every achievement I tried to share that you dismissed or ignored. Every holiday photo where I was positioned at the edge like an afterthought. How could you possibly not realize? I don't know, she whispered. I honestly don't know, Claire. Maybe we were so focused on Derek because he was easier, because he fit into the vision we had of what our family should be. Maybe we were overwhelmed by you, by how different you were from what we expected. Maybe we just failed, and there's no better explanation than that. Her honesty caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness, justifications, the usual Whitman strategy of reframing problems as misunderstandings. But this raw admission of failure was something new. I need time, I said. I need to think about what kind of relationship, if any, I want with this family. I can't just pretend everything's fine because you've suddenly realized I'm worth acknowledging. That's fair, my mother said. Take whatever time you need. But Claire, please, when you're ready, talk to us. Don't shut us out forever. You shut me out first, I reminded her. I'm just honoring the boundary you established. I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding. The conversation had gone deeper than I'd expected, touched wounds I thought I'd already cauterized. My mother's vulnerability had been unexpected, almost disarming, but it didn't change the fundamental facts. They'd excluded me deliberately, repeatedly, systematically. One tearful phone call didn't undo 31 years of neglect. The waterfront project became my refuge over the following weeks. We moved into detailed design phase, holding community meetings to gather input from the neighborhoods that would be affected by the development. I spent long evenings in high school gymnasiums and community centers, presenting plans and answering questions from residents who were skeptical that anyone in power actually cared about their needs. These meetings were challenging in ways that had nothing to do with architecture. People had been promised things before by developers and politicians, promises that evaporated once the cameras stopped rolling and the ribbon-cutting ceremonies ended. They'd watched their neighborhoods change around them, longtime residents displaced by rising rents, local businesses replaced by chains designed for wealthier transplants. They had every reason to distrust another development project, even one with affordable housing components. I learned to listen more than I spoke in these meetings. To take notes when elderly residents talked about the neighborhood's history, when young parents described the lack of safe play spaces, when small business owners worried about being priced out during construction. Every concern got recorded, considered, incorporated into the evolving design. One evening in mid-October, a woman named Dorothy Reeves stood up during the question period at a community meeting in the Lentz neighborhood. She was in her 70s, wearing a practical cardigan and carrying a worn tote bag, her white hair pulled back in a bun. She looked like someone's grandmother, which she probably was, but her voice carried the authority of someone who'd been fighting battles for decades. "Miss Whitman," she said, and the room quieted. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 43 years. I've seen developers come through here with pretty pictures and nice words about community partnership. Then they build whatever makes them the most money and we never see them again. Why should we believe you're any different?" "You shouldn't," I said, and I saw surprise flicker across her face. "Not based on my words. Words are easy. You should judge me based on my previous projects and hold me accountable if this one doesn't meet the same standards." I pulled up photos on the projection screen. The North Portland Housing Development, the Mission District Community Center, the Live Workspaces in Southeast. For each one, I showed the original community input we'd received, the design modifications we'd made in response, and the final result. Then I showed resident satisfaction surveys conducted 2 years after completion. "These buildings still serve the people they were designed for," I said. "Low-income residents haven't been displaced. The promised amenities actually exist and are maintained. Community spaces are open and accessible. I'm not asking you to trust me based on promises. I'm asking you to look at my track record and decide if it's worth engaging with this process." Dorothy studied the images for a long moment. Then she said, "I looked you up after I saw your name on the meeting flyer. Read about you in that magazine article. Seems like you know something about being excluded and overlooked." "I do," I confirmed. "Well," she said, settling back into her seat. "Maybe that means you'll actually remember that we're people, not just units in your affordable housing quota. I'm willing to give you a chance, Miss Whitman. But I'll be watching, and if you disappoint us, you'll be hearing about it." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Reeves. I'd rather have honest accountability than polite silence." After the meeting, Dorothy approached me as I was packing up my materials. She handed me a folder filled with photos and newspaper clippings, documentation of the neighborhood's history. Her hands were weathered, the knuckles slightly swollen with arthritis. "This is who we are," she said. "Not just people who need affordable housing, but people with history and community and connections that matter. Don't forget that when you're making your design decisions." "I won't," I promised, taking the folder carefully. "This goes directly into our research materials. Everyone on my team will see it." She studied me for a moment, her expression softening. "That article about your family, it was hard to read. Not because of what you said about them, but because I recognized something in it. I raised 3 children by myself after my husband passed. Worked 2 jobs, kept us housed and fed. 2 of my kids turned out fine, grateful for what I sacrificed. The 3rd one barely speaks to me now, thinks I embarrassed him by being a janitor at his high school." "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "Don't be sorry," she replied. "Just remember that family is supposed to be the people who see you when everyone else is looking past you. When they stop doing that, well, sometimes you have to build a new family from scratch. Looks like that's what you've done with your team." She patted my arm and walked away, leaving me standing in the empty community center with her folder of neighborhood memories and a lump in my throat. Dorothy was right. My team at Meridian had become my family, the people who celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges, who knew me as I actually was rather than as a disappointment relative to some imaginary standard. That realization carried me through the next month of intensive work. We refined the waterfront designs based on community input, adjusting building heights to preserve view corridors, adding more green space than originally planned, incorporating public art installations that would be selected by neighborhood residents rather than imposed by developers. Every decision was documented, every change explained, every promise made in public record so it could be enforced later. The project was enormous, overwhelming at times, but it felt important in ways that went beyond professional achievement. We were trying to prove that development didn't have to mean displacement, that affordable housing could be beautiful and dignified, that economic diversity made communities stronger rather than weaker. If we succeeded, the waterfront project could become a model for other cities. If we failed, we'd confirm every skeptic's belief that this kind of intentional, inclusive development was naive and impractical. In early November, the city hosted a major press event to announce the groundbreaking date for the waterfront project. The mayor would be there, city council members, representatives from the development consortium, community leaders. And me, as the public face of the architectural vision. Victoria coached me on talking points, reminding me to emphasize the partnership aspects, the community input process, the long-term affordability protections. The press conference was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at the waterfront site itself, on a raised platform overlooking the water where the first phase of development would begin. Media crews arrived early, setting up cameras and microphones. City officials clustered in small groups, rehearsing their remarks. I stood slightly apart, reviewing my notes and trying to settle the nervous energy that always preceded public speaking. That's when I saw them. My parents, standing near the back of the assembled crowd, both dressed formally like they were attending something important. My mother wore her navy suit, the one she saved for occasions that required gravitas. My father had on his charcoal blazer with a tie I recognized from family photos. They stood close together, my mother's hand on my father's arm, both of them scanning the crowd until they found me. Our eyes met across 50 feet of open space. My mother's expression was pleading, hopeful. My father looked uncomfortable but determined. They'd come to the press conference, to my professional event, uninvited and unexpected. I turned away, focusing on Victoria, who was approaching with last-minute updates. "The mayor's running a few minutes late," she said. "We'll delay the start by 10 minutes. Are you ready?" "I'm ready," I confirmed, not mentioning the Whitman standing in the crowd. The press conference proceeded smoothly. The mayor spoke about Portland's commitment to affordable housing and inclusive development. Council members praised the community input process. The development consortium representative discussed the financial innovation required to make mixed-income housing economically viable. Then it was my turn. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the assembled crowd. Reporters with recorders, community members from the neighborhoods we'd been meeting with, city officials, curious onlookers. And my parents, still standing near the back, watching. This project represents a fundamental belief that cities should serve all residents, not just the wealthy, I began. That affordable housing shouldn't be segregated to the least desirable locations or designed without care and dignity. That economic diversity makes communities stronger, more resilient, more interesting. I talked about the research tour, the lessons learned from other cities, the community meetings where residents had shared their concerns and aspirations. I talked about Dorothy Reeves and her folder of neighborhood history, about the importance of designing for people rather than abstractions. I talked about my team at Meridian and our commitment to seeing this project through not just to ribbon cutting, but to ongoing success years down the line. When I finished, reporters shouted questions. I answered them methodically, explaining technical details about construction timelines and affordability requirements, discussing the challenges we anticipated and how we planned to address them. The whole event lasted 90 minutes, and throughout it all, my parents stood in their spot at the back, listening. After the formal program ended, I was immediately surrounded by people wanting to discuss specifics. Community members with detailed questions about unit sizes and application processes. Journalists requesting follow-up interviews. City staff needing decisions on permit timelines. I moved through these conversations with practiced efficiency, part of my attention always aware of where my parents were standing, whether they were approaching. They waited until the crowd had thinned considerably. Then my father walked toward me, my mother slightly behind him, both moving carefully like they were approaching something fragile that might shatter if handled roughly. "Claire," my father said when he was close enough to speak without shouting. That was impressive. Really impressive. "Thank you," I said, my voice neutral and professional. "We were hoping we could talk," he continued. "Maybe get coffee or dinner, somewhere we could have a real conversation." "I'm pretty busy with the project," I said. "The next few months are critical for keeping everything on schedule." "We understand that," my mother interjected. "We do, Claire. But we've been trying to reach you for weeks, and you won't return our calls. We thought if we came to a public event, you might at least speak with us." "So you ambushed me at a professional event," I said quietly. "That's your strategy?" "We're desperate," my father admitted. "We know we handled things badly, the wedding, everything that came before. We want a chance to make it right." I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time in months. My father seemed older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders slightly hunched. My mother's hands were trembling slightly where she clutched her purse. They were uncomfortable, out of their element, standing at my professional event like supplicants rather than the authority figures they'd always been in my life. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes, I said, which was true. "Victoria and I need to review construction bids before the city deadline tomorrow. I don't have time for this conversation right now." "When will you have time?" my mother asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Just tell us when, and we'll be there. Anywhere you want, any time that works for you." "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know if I want to have this conversation at all, and I don't know what good it would do if we did." "We're your parents," my father said. "That has to mean something." "Does it?" I met his eyes directly. "You're biologically my parents. You raised me, in the technical sense of providing food and shelter and making sure I went to school. But you've never been interested in knowing me as a person. You've never valued what I do or who I've become. So I'm genuinely asking, what does the parent-child relationship mean when those elements are missing?" My mother was crying again, tears tracking down her carefully made-up face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know you don't believe me, but I am truly sorry, Claire. I see now how we failed you, how we made you feel invisible and unimportant. If I could go back and change it, I would. But you can't go back," I said. "None of us can. We can only decide what happens next, and I'm not ready to decide that yet." Victoria appeared at my elbow, her timing perfect as always. "Claire, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we really need to leave if we're going to make the meeting at City Hall." I turned back to my parents. "I have to go. If I decide I want to talk, I'll reach out. But you can't keep showing up at my work events. That's not appropriate." "We won't," my father promised. "We just needed to see you, to say something in person rather than leaving more messages you won't answer." I nodded and walked away with Victoria, leaving them standing on the waterfront as the sun set over the water. In the car, Victoria glanced at me with concern. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "They apologized, which is something. But I don't know if apologies fix what's broken when it's been broken this long." "You don't have to decide right now," Victoria said gently. "Family stuff is complicated. Take your time figuring out what you need." The construction bids meeting was a welcome distraction, 3 hours of discussing load-bearing specifications and foundation requirements and weather contingencies. By the time we finished, it was after 8 and I was exhausted, my brain full of technical details and schedule projections. I drove home through the dark Portland streets, past the bars and restaurants of the city's east side, past the neighborhoods where my completed projects stood quietly serving their residents. My apartment felt empty when I walked in, just a space I slept in between work days, nothing that felt particularly permanent or personal. I made tea and sat at my small kitchen table with Dorothy's folder of neighborhood history. The photos showed block parties from the 1970s, local businesses that had closed decades ago, families gathered on front porches that no longer existed. Dorothy appeared in several photos, younger but recognizable, always at the center of community gatherings, holding signs at protests, organizing neighborhood cleanups. She'd built a life of connection and meaning in her community, even when that community changed around her, even when her own family didn't appreciate the sacrifices she'd made. She'd found purpose in the work itself rather than in external validation. That was the lesson, I realized. That was what I'd been learning through Meridian and the Waterfront Project and the slow, painful separation from the Whitmans. My worth wasn't determined by my parents' opinion of me. It was determined by the work I did, the people I helped, the communities I served, and the integrity I brought to all of it. Whether Martin and Patricia Whitman ever understood that was ultimately irrelevant to the truth of it. My phone buzzed with a text message. Derek. The message was brief, unlike his usual rambling attempts at communication. I saw Mom and Dad tonight. They came home upset after the press conference. I don't know what was said, but I wanted you to know I support whatever decision you make about them. You don't owe anyone forgiveness or reconciliation. Just thought you should hear that from someone in the family. I stared at the message for a long time. Derek supporting my choices was new, unexpected. Throughout our lives, he'd been the peacekeeper, the one who tried to smooth things over and make everyone comfortable. This was different, him explicitly validating my right to maintain boundaries even if those boundaries hurt our parents. I typed back a simple response. Thank you. That means more than you might think. His reply came quickly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the wedding. You were right, I should have stood up for you. I was thinking about myself and my comfort instead of basic decency toward my sister. I'd like to do better going forward, if you'll let me. I set the phone down without responding immediately. Derek's apology felt genuine, less about managing his own discomfort and more about genuine recognition of failure. But I'd learned over the past months that recognizing failure was just the beginning. The real question was whether people could actually change their behavior, could move beyond apologies to different actions. Time would tell. With Derek, with my parents, with the whole complicated web of family relationships that I'd spent most of my adult life trying to navigate. For now, I had work to do, a waterfront to transform, communities to serve. That was enough. That had to be enough. The following week brought unexpected developments. A national architecture magazine requested a feature story about Meridian Design Collaborative and the Waterfront Project. A university in Seattle invited me to give a guest lecture on community-engaged design. The mayor's office asked me to join an advisory committee on citywide housing policy. Each opportunity represented validation of my work, recognition that came from merit rather than family connection or social positioning. These were people and institutions that saw what I'd built and wanted to engage with it seriously. The contrast with my family's decades of dismissive indifference couldn't have been more stark. I accepted the magazine feature and the university lecture. I declined the advisory committee with regret, explaining that the waterfront project required my full attention for the next year. Victoria encouraged me to say yes to everything, but I'd learned the importance of protecting my time and energy for the work that mattered most. The magazine interview happened in my office, a photographer spending an afternoon capturing images of our workspace while a journalist named Marcus Chin asked detailed questions about my design philosophy and business model. He was thorough, pushing beyond surface-level questions to understand the economics of affordable housing development and the challenges of maintaining community trust. The conversation eventually shifted to the Portland Monthly article and its aftermath. Marcus had clearly done his research, and he approached the topic with careful professionalism. The piece about your family situation generated significant discussion in the architecture community, he said. Not just about family dynamics, but about how women in male-dominated fields often face dismissal from the people closest to them. Would you be comfortable discussing that aspect? I thought about deflecting, keeping the focus purely professional. But Dorothy's words echoed in my mind about being seen when everyone else is looking past you. Maybe my story mattered not just as personal narrative but as something other people could recognize in their own lives. Women are often expected to make their achievements palatable, I said slowly. To be successful but not too successful, accomplished but not threatening, confident but not arrogant. When you refuse to play that game, when you just do excellent work without apologizing for it, some people react badly. Sometimes those people are your family. Marcus nodded, writing quickly. Your mother was quoted in a follow-up piece saying she didn't realize the extent of your success because you never shared it with them. How do you respond to that? I spent years trying to share it, I said. Every achievement I tried to discuss was met with disinterest or subject changes or forgetting we'd had the conversation. Eventually you stop offering information that nobody wants. That's not secretiveness, that's just learning which doors are actually open and which ones just look open from a distance. The photographer asked me to move to different locations in the office for various shots. Standing at the design table with blueprints spread out. At my desk with the city skyline visible through the window. With my team in the background, collaborating over a model of the waterfront development. Each image told a story of professional competence and collaborative success. After they left, I felt drained in the way that comes from sustained vulnerability. Talking about the family situation publicly still felt strange, like exposing something that should have stayed private. But the private approach had protected my parents' reputation while leaving my own accomplishments invisible. Maybe it was time for a different strategy. Thanksgiving was approaching, the first holiday since Derek's wedding. Traditionally, the Whitman family gathered at my parents' house for an elaborate dinner with extended relatives and family friends. I'd received no invitation this year, which wasn't surprising given the circumstances. What was surprising was how little I minded. Tyler asked about my holiday plans during a team meeting in mid-November. Just the staff casually sharing what they'd be doing over the long weekend. Working, probably, I said. The construction schedule doesn't care about holidays, and I want to finalize the Phase 2 designs before the December deadline. You should take a break, Victoria interjected gently. Even successful workaholics need rest. I'll think about it, I promised, though we both knew I wouldn't. The day before Thanksgiving, Derek called again. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Claire, hey. His voice was hesitant. I know this is last minute, but Bethany and I are hosting Thanksgiving at our place this year. Just us, maybe a few friends. I wanted to invite you, if you're interested. Not at Mom and Dad's? I asked, surprised. No. We decided to start our own traditions, separate from the whole Whitman family drama. He paused. You'd be welcome here. No pressure, no expectations. Just dinner with your brother and his wife. I don't know, Derek. Things are still complicated. I understand. The invitation stands regardless. We'll be eating around 3 if you change your mind. He hung up before I could respond further, leaving me holding my phone and contemplating this unexpected development. Derek breaking with family tradition to host his own Thanksgiving, actively inviting me when our parents presumably weren't welcome. It suggested a shift I hadn't anticipated, a willingness to choose connection over obligation. I spent Thanksgiving morning at the waterfront site, walking the perimeter where construction would begin in January. The ground was cold and muddy, the river gray under overcast skies. This empty lot would transform over the next 2 years into housing and community spaces and public parks. Hundreds of people would live here, build lives here, raise children and start businesses and create the kind of neighborhood density that made cities vibrant. Standing there alone on Thanksgiving morning, I felt the weight of that responsibility and the privilege of being trusted with it. This was what mattered, what I'd chosen to build my life around. Family, in the traditional sense, had let me down. But I'd created something else, a different kind of family through the work itself and the people committed to doing it well. Around 1 in the afternoon, I texted Derek. What's your address? His response came immediately, along with enthusiastic gratitude for coming. I went home to change out of my work clothes, putting on jeans and a simple sweater, nothing fancy. This wasn't a performance, just dinner with my brother. Derek and Bethany lived in a small house in the Selwood neighborhood, a modest 2-bedroom with a bright yellow door and a garden that showed signs of recent attention. Derek answered on the first knock, his face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw me. You came, he said, ushering me inside. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I admitted. The house smelled like roasting turkey and herbs. Bethany emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron and carrying a wooden spoon. She was prettier in person than in photos, with warm brown eyes and an open expression that seemed genuinely welcoming rather than politely tolerant. Claire, I'm so glad you could make it. Derek's been nervous all morning that you'd decide not to come. I brought wine, I said, holding up the bottle I'd grabbed from my apartment. It's not much, but it's perfect, Bethany said, taking it with a smile. Come help me in the kitchen. Derek's banned after he almost burned the green beans. The kitchen was small but efficient, every surface covered with dishes in various stages of preparation. Bethany handed me a cutting board and vegetables, and we worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before she spoke. I want you to know that I had no idea about the wedding situation until after the fact. Derek told me his sister couldn't make it, but he didn't explain why. When I learned what my parents and his parents had arranged, I was horrified. I looked up from chopping carrots. It wasn't your fault. Maybe not, but it happened at my wedding, and that makes me feel responsible. She was mashing potatoes with more force than necessary. My family can be difficult about appearances and status. They probably did put pressure on Derek's parents about family dynamics. But that doesn't excuse asking you not to come. Pressure or not, it was their decision, I said. Your in-laws made a choice about what mattered more to them. You didn't make that choice. Still, I'm sorry you were hurt. And I'm sorry I didn't know you existed beyond Derek's occasional mentions of having a sister. He never talked about your work or your life, and I assumed there wasn't much to tell. She glanced at me apologetically. That sounds terrible saying it out loud. It's honest, I said. And it's what everyone assumed because it's what my family told them to assume. We finished preparing the meal together, the conversation flowing more easily than I'd expected. Bethany asked intelligent questions about the waterfront project, having actually read the articles and understood the complexity of what we were attempting. She talked about her own work in pharmaceutical sales, the challenges of being a woman in a field dominated by men who assumed she'd gotten her position through looks rather than competence. Derek joined us when it was time to carry dishes to the table. He'd set it carefully with mismatched plates and cloth napkins, clearly making an effort despite limited resources. There were only 3 place settings, confirmation that this really was just us, no other guests or family members appearing to complicate things. The meal itself was surprisingly good, Bethany having more cooking skills than I'd expected. We ate and talked about neutral topics at first. The unusually mild fall weather, changes in the Portland neighborhood landscape, a movie Derek and Bethany had seen recently. Surface-level conversation that felt like groundwork for something deeper. Finally, over dessert, Derek set down his fork and looked at me directly. I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. I nodded, waiting. I failed you as a brother, he said, his voice steady despite obvious discomfort. Not just with the wedding, though that was the most obvious failure. I failed you for years by going along with Mom and Dad's treatment of you, by benefiting from being the favored child without ever questioning why that favoritism existed or what it cost you. Derek, Bethany said softly, her hand covering his. He shook his head. No, I need to say this. Claire deserves to hear it. He looked back at me. I told myself I was keeping the peace, being diplomatic, not taking sides. But neutrality in the face of unfair treatment is just another form of complicity. I should have stood up for you, asked Mom and Dad why they never talked about your achievements, insisted you be included in family events and conversations. I didn't do any of that because it was easier not to. I sat quietly, letting his words settle. This was different from his earlier text apology, more thorough and less self-protective. When that article came out and I learned about your firm and your projects, I felt ashamed, Derek continued. Not because you'd aired family business publicly, but because I realized I knew nothing about your life. My own sister had built this incredible career, was doing meaningful work that helped people, and I'd never bothered to ask about it. I just accepted Mom and Dad's vague explanations and moved on. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I want to do better, he said. Because Bethany pointed out that I was about to repeat my parents' mistakes with our own future kids if I didn't address the pattern now. And because you deserve a brother who actually acts like family instead of just claiming the title. Bethany picked up where Derek left off. We're not asking you to forgive everything immediately or pretend the past didn't happen. But we'd like the chance to build something different going forward. Real relationship based on actually knowing each other, supporting each other's work and lives, being people who show up for each other. I felt unexpected emotion tighten my throat. This was what I'd wanted for years, family members who saw me clearly and valued what they saw. But it was coming years too late, after I'd already learned to live without it. I appreciate this, I said carefully. Both of you, genuinely. But I need you to understand that I've built a life that doesn't require family validation. I have work I love, people I trust, purpose that sustains me. I'm not the Claire who desperately needed her family to notice her anymore. We know, Derek said. And honestly, that makes your presence here even more meaningful. You don't need us, but you came anyway. That's generous in a way I'm not sure I'd be capable of if our positions were reversed. I'm not saying I won't build relationship with you, I clarified. I'm saying it has to be real and mutual, not me always reaching out while you passively accept my efforts. If we're going to be family in any meaningful sense, you have to show up consistently, not just when it's dramatic or convenient. We can do that, Bethany said firmly. We want to do that. The rest of the afternoon passed more comfortably. Derek asked detailed questions about the waterfront project, showing genuine interest in the technical challenges and community engagement processes. Bethany shared stories from her own career, the frustrations of working in an industry that valued her appearance before her abilities. We laughed over shared experiences of professional dismissal and the satisfaction of proving doubters wrong. As I was leaving, Derek hugged me at the door, holding on longer than necessary. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. I know I don't deserve your trust yet, but I'm going to earn it. I drove home as dusk settled over Portland, my mind full of complicated feelings. The afternoon had been good, surprisingly genuine, but it also highlighted how much time had been wasted, how many years we could have been building real relationship if Derek had been willing to look past our parents' narratives earlier. Resentment and hope mixed uneasily, fighting for dominance. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment parking lot. My mother. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment, then answered. Hello, Mom. Claire, thank goodness. I was afraid you wouldn't pick up. Her voice was rushed, anxious. I wanted to call on Thanksgiving, to wish you a good holiday, to see if maybe you'd consider joining us, but Martin said I should give you space, wait for you to reach out when you were ready, but then Derek mentioned you were going to his house and I thought maybe, Mom, slow down. I interrupted her rambling. Take a breath. I heard her inhale shakily. I miss you, she said simply. I know I have no right to miss you after everything, but I do. The house felt wrong today without you here, even though you haven't been to Thanksgiving dinner in years because you always said you had to work. I never questioned whether that was true or if you just didn't want to come. I should have questioned it. I should have made you feel welcome enough that you'd want to be there. This vulnerability from my mother was still jarring, so different from her usual controlled presentation. Part of me wanted to protect myself from it, maintain the defensive walls I'd built. But another part, the part that had gone to Derek's house despite every reason not to, was curious about what might be possible if I allowed space for something new. Thanksgiving felt wrong for us too, my mother continued. Just Martin and me and some relatives who spent the whole meal asking where you and Derek were, whether there'd been some family falling out. Everyone's seen the articles, everyone knows something happened. We couldn't hide it anymore. Did you want to hide it? I asked. Yes, she admitted. At first, absolutely. I wanted to manage the narrative, make it seem like a simple misunderstanding or natural growing apart. But Martin pointed out that lying about it just makes everything worse, confirms what people already suspect about us being the kind of family that values image over substance. That's surprisingly insightful of Dad, I said. He's been doing a lot of thinking, she said. We both have. Would you be willing to meet with us? Not for us to explain ourselves or make excuses, but to listen to what you need from us going forward, if anything. I don't know what I need, I said honestly. I've spent months learning to not need anything from you. Unlearning that isn't simple. Will you at least consider it? She sounded desperate in a way I'd never heard. I know we've given you every reason not to trust us or give us chances we don't deserve. But Claire, you're our daughter. That has to count for something, even if we've done everything possible to devalue it. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I can promise right now. That's more than I hoped for, she said quietly. Thank you for not hanging up on me. After we disconnected, I sat in my car watching lights come on in apartment windows around the complex. People settling in for the evening, families together or alone, each unit containing its own complicated story of connection and disappointment and hope. I was just one story among thousands, nothing unique or special about family dysfunction and the hard work of deciding whether to repair it or walk away. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. See you Monday for the Phase 2 presentation. The Phase 2 presentation. That was real, concrete, important. That was the work that defined me, the contribution that would last beyond whatever happened with the Whitmans. I needed to remember that, keep it central even as I navigated these complicated family waters. December arrived with cold rain and shortened days. The waterfront project consumed most of my waking hours as we finalized designs, submitted permit applications, negotiated construction contracts. The city was moving forward with unusual efficiency, everyone motivated by the opportunity to create something genuinely transformative rather than just another development that looked impressive in renderings but failed to deliver real community benefit. Dorothy Reeves became an unofficial advisor, attending design meetings and offering feedback that kept us honest. She had no formal authority but carried the moral weight of someone who'd lived through decades of broken promises. When she approved a design element, the team knew it would work. When she raised concerns, we listened carefully and adjusted. One afternoon in mid-December, Dorothy and I walked the waterfront site together. She moved slowly, her arthritis worse in the cold weather, but she insisted on seeing the actual location rather than just reviewing plans in a warm office. This is where the community center goes? She asked, pointing to a section we'd marked with stakes and bright tape. That's right. Ground floor retail and community services, second floor meeting rooms and event space, third floor affordable housing units with views of the river. And you're sure those housing units will actually be affordable? Not affordable by Portland standards where affordable means $1,000 a month? I showed her the detailed income calculations, the rent structures locked in through legal agreements with the city. Dorothy studied them carefully, her reading glasses perched on her nose. You did your homework, she admitted. Most developers talk a good game about affordability then find ways to weasel out of it later. You've closed the loopholes. That was the goal, I said. Build something that actually serves the community rather than just enriches investors. She looked at me thoughtfully. Your family doesn't understand what you do they? The question caught me off guard. No, they don't. My son who doesn't talk to me, he doesn't understand either, Dorothy said. Thinks the work I did was beneath me, embarrassing. He wanted me to be something different, something more respectable by his standards. She shook her head. But I kept this neighborhood together through hard times. I made sure kids had safe places to play, that elderly neighbors got checked on, that people had someone to call when things went wrong. That was real work, important work. Just because it didn't come with a fancy title doesn't make it less valuable. I felt the parallel she was drawing. You're saying I shouldn't need my family's validation. I'm saying you already know you don't need it, Dorothy corrected. But that doesn't mean it wouldn't be nice to have it. There's nothing wrong with wanting your family to see you clearly. The problem is when you twist yourself into something unrecognizable trying to get that recognition. We walked in silence for a while, the river gray and restless beside us. Dorothy's words settled into me, truth I'd been circling around without quite articulating. I'd built a life without my family's approval, proven I could thrive without their validation. But some part of me still wanted them to see what I'd become, to recognize the value of what I'd built. That want didn't make me weak or dependent. It just made me human. As we finished the site walk, Dorothy turned to me one last time. Whatever happens with your family, don't let it distract you from this work. These buildings will matter long after all of us are gone. That's the real legacy, not whether your parents figure out how to appreciate you. She was right, of course. The waterfront project would serve thousands of people over decades. It would prove that affordable housing could be beautiful and sustainable, that economic diversity strengthened communities, that thoughtful design could transform neighborhoods without displacing residents. That mattered more than family reconciliation or personal vindication. But I was learning that both things could be true. The work mattered most, and I could still hope for relationship with my family. Those weren't competing priorities, just different aspects of a complicated life. The invitation came in late December, a formal card in the mail just like Derek's wedding invitation had been. But this time, the handwriting was different, more hesitant, and the message was simple. Claire, we would like to invite you to dinner at our home on December 28th at 6 o'clock. No expectations, no agenda beyond conversation. We understand if you decline, but we hope you'll consider giving us the opportunity to listen. Mom and Dad. I held the card for a long time, feeling its weight, the care that had gone into writing it. This was different from the phone calls and ambush at the press conference. This was a formal request, respectful of my boundaries, offering me control over whether and how we engaged. I called Derek that evening. Did you know they were sending this? Yeah, he said. They asked my advice. I told them to keep it simple, no pressure, just an honest invitation. Are you going to go? I don't know. What would be the point? Maybe there isn't one, Derek admitted. Maybe they've changed too late for it to matter. But I've seen them these past few months, Claire. They're different. Dad actually asks about things beyond surface level now. Mom has been volunteering at a housing nonprofit, trying to understand the work you do. They're trying. Trying doesn't undo 30 years, I said. No, it doesn't. But maybe it's something. I thought about it for 3 days, the cards sitting on my kitchen counter like a question I couldn't quite answer. Finally, on December 27th, I texted my mother a simple response. I'll be there. The house looked the same when I pulled up on the 28th. The colonial with its perfect landscaping and expensive cars in the driveway. But walking up to the front door felt different now. I wasn't the dismissed daughter hoping for scraps of approval. I was a successful professional choosing whether to extend grace to people who'd failed me. My father answered the door. He'd aged visibly since I'd last seen him up close, his hair more gray, his face showing the weight of stress. Claire, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you for coming. The house smelled like cooking, real cooking rather than the catered meals my mother usually served for important occasions. She appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron, her makeup minimal, her expression nervous. I made pot roast, she said. I remembered it was your favorite when you were younger. I hope that's still true. It is, I said, surprised she'd remembered it all. We sat in the living room, the three of us, with drinks neither of my parents were touching. The silence stretched awkwardly until my father cleared his throat. We asked you here to listen, he said. Not to defend ourselves or explain away what we did. We want to hear from you what damage we caused and what you need from us, if anything, going forward. I wasn't prepared for such direct opening, but I appreciated it. You made me feel invisible, I said. Like nothing I did mattered unless it reflected well on you. And when it became clear I wasn't going to be the daughter you wanted, you just stopped seeing me at all. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. The wedding was just the final confirmation of what I'd always known, I continued. That you valued appearances and comfort over basic family loyalty. You literally asked me to disappear, and when I did, you were upset that I disappeared too thoroughly. You were right about us, my father said quietly. About valuing appearances over substance. I spent 40 years building a reputation in this community, and I told myself that reputation mattered because it provided stability for our family. But really, I just liked being respected. I liked being seen as successful. And when you didn't fit the image of success I recognized, I dismissed you rather than questioning whether my definition needed expanding. My mother spoke up, her voice shaking. I gave up my own dreams to be a wife and mother, and I resented you for achieving what I couldn't. Every time you succeeded, it reminded me of my own failures. So I minimized your accomplishments to protect myself from that pain. She wiped at her eyes. That's inexcusable. You deserved a mother who celebrated your success, not one who felt threatened by it. We've been in therapy, my father added. Both together and individually. Trying to understand how we became people who could treat their daughter this way. The therapist helped us see patterns we've been repeating our entire marriage. I sat with their words, feeling the sincerity beneath them. This wasn't the defensive justification I'd expected. It was genuine accountability. I've built a good life without your approval, I said. I have work that matters, people who value me, purpose that sustains me. I don't need you to complete me or validate my choices. We know, my mother said. We've seen what you built. I've been volunteering at the housing nonprofit, learning about the work you do. Claire, it's extraordinary. The thought and care you put into serving communities, the way you've created beautiful spaces that actually help people. I'm so proud of you, and I'm devastated that I wasn't saying that all along. The dinner that followed was tentative but real. We talked about the waterfront project, and for the first time, my parents asked intelligent questions and actually listened to the answers. My father shared that he'd started mentoring young accountants at his firm, trying to be the supportive presence he'd failed to be for me. My mother talked about her volunteer work, how eye-opening it had been to understand housing insecurity firsthand. As I prepared to leave, my mother handed me a small box. Inside was a silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny architectural rendering of a building. I had it custom-made, she said. It's your North Portland project, the first one you completed. I wanted you to have something that acknowledged what you've built, literally and figuratively. I felt unexpected tears. Thank you, I said. My father hugged me at the door, something he hadn't done since I was a child. We can't undo the past, he said. But if you'll let us, we'd like to be part of your future. Not as critics or judges, just as parents who finally learned to see their daughter clearly. I drove home through the dark Portland streets, the bracelet warm against my wrist. My family hadn't been fixed in one dinner. Trust would take time to rebuild, patterns would be hard to break, and there would inevitably be setbacks. But something had shifted, some door had opened that I'd thought was permanently closed. The waterfront project broke ground in January with Dorothy beside me holding a ceremonial shovel. My parents came to the ceremony, standing in the crowd, not demanding special recognition, just being present. Derek and Bethany were there too, cheering loudly when I gave my speech about building communities that served everyone. 6 months later, when the first foundation was poured, my mother brought her garden club friends to tour the site. She explained the affordable housing component with genuine understanding, fielded their questions with knowledge she'd gained through her volunteer work. My father started bringing colleagues from his firm to see the construction progress, using it as an example of how financial innovation could serve social good. They weren't perfect. There were still moments when old patterns emerged, when they said something dismissive or forgot to ask about my work. But they caught themselves now, apologized, tried again. It was messy and imperfect and slow, but it was real. I learned that disappearing had been the right choice for me, that absence had created the space necessary for everyone to recognize what was missing. But I also learned that reappearing, on my own terms, with my own boundaries, was its own kind of strength. I didn't need my family's validation, but I could accept their belated recognition without it diminishing what I'd built independently. The best gift I'd given myself wasn't disappearing from their lives. It was learning that my worth existed completely separate from their opinion of it, that I could build something meaningful regardless of whether they ever understood or appreciated it. Everything else, including their eventual recognition, was just bonus. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.